Highlanders Captive.
Written by Barbara Bard and published by Starfall Publications. Book from Highlanders Fighting for Love series. Save more with our ebook and audiobook bundles on our website, starfallpublicationsbooks.com. Subscribe for more audiobooks. Enjoy.
Chapter 1. The camp was a frightful place, almost as loud as the battle. Fires were lit across a field, and in the distance a castle loomed, blotting out the stars. The men and women acted like animals, singing and rejoicing in their victory. There seemed to be no dignity in them, for they did not mourn their dead at all. Catherine looked at the young man sitting with his back to her, entirely taken aback by his display of aggression. The stench of alcohol wafted in the air like a bad omen. He was huge, by Highlander standards, but she could tell he had a youthful energy welling inside him. She knew him as Declan. He was related to the family that ruled over the part of the Highlands she was taken to. As she looked around, she did not like her chances of living here. Sarah had promised her that she would find happiness here, but at the moment, she did not understand how that was possibly going to happen. The death of her brother, Lord Harold Flynn, was still taking a huge toll on her. His death at the battleground, slain by a Highlander, made her sadder. Harold had died as he had lived. He'd always been reckless and thrown himself into fights when he should have been more prudent. Father would be most disappointed in him. But that wasn't the only surprise she got. Her brother's intended bride, Rosemary, turned out to be Sarah, who had lied about her identity to save her head all along. The deception ate deep into her mind. And then, to top it all off, Catherine had suffered the indignity of being carried away as a common prisoner, and Sarah acted as though she was doing her a favour. Part of her could understand why Sarah had brought her back from the Sassenach camp, and in truth, Catherine had to admit that she was glad to be free from her father's shackles. For all of Sarah's best efforts, Catherine had only escaped that fate for a short time. She knew that he would come to free her and to gain revenge for Harold's death. It was inevitable that her fate was to be married off to a man. The best she could hope for was that he gave her a child, and then died soon after. Catherine didn't understand how Sarah could think that she'd be happy in this place. Yes, it was pleasing not to have to think about being married off. But where was the luxury? Where was the comfort? She stared at the Highlander who guarded her and hissed. Sarah seemed to be happy with the man she had found, but being a simple handmaiden, Catherine was quite sure that she was not the best judge of character. As for Rosemary, the real Rosemary, Catherine didn't understand. She never came to marry Harold, had indeed chosen a life with one of these brutes rather than a life with her brother. For all his faults, Catherine couldn't imagine how any lady could choose a life with a Highlander over one with a Sassenach gentleman. Perhaps in time when she spoke to them properly, they would be able to explain themselves to her. Until then, Catherine would have to remain confused. She was distracted by her thoughts when another man approached the guard. When he came closer, she could see that it was the man who Sarah claimed to love. Catherine was unable to deny that he was a handsome man in a rough, savage kind of way. The thought of being close to him made her shudder. Drew only remained there for a short time before moving away again. A cheer rose up as he immersed himself in the camp. Her guard remained sitting, his shoulders slumped, looking isolated from the rest of his people. It was almost enough for Catherine to pity him. Almost. "Are you going to sit there and sulk all night?" Catherine said. "You don't seem to be a very good guard if you're going to be getting drunk on the job," she said, more out of boredom than anything else. The young man didn't respond. He tossed his head back towards her, but didn't say anything. She shook her head. A few of the other Highlanders walked by her, looking with curiosity. Some of them hurled abuse her way, taunting her for being a prisoner, and although she wasn't a mean person, She did wish that someone else had been captured with her so she had someone to talk to. The Highland camp seemed to be an uncivilized place. They feasted and sang like barbarians, revelling in the Sassenach blood spilled. It was hardly a place of decorum, and Catherine began to look for a way to escape. She had not been raised to live in this squalor. The night was cold, and she pulled the blanket she had been provided with over her. She looked into the distance. All around her was blackness. She was so far from home and so alone. For the first time in her life, she was truly scared for the future because she didn't have Harold to protect her, and her father was far away. "Please come soon, Father. Please come and rescue me," she said, feeling like a little girl. As soon as the words left her lips, the guard pushed himself up and staggered towards her. He dropped his empty mug to the ground. Catherine recoiled in horror, having heard tales of what the brutes did to their prisoners. She would die before she gave up her maidenhood. The guard's face snarled and looked repulsive. His eyes bulged upon his face, and his pink tongue rolled across his lips. Catherine steeled herself for the worst, putting on a stern expression, even though her insides were water. "Get up!" he growled. "I beg your pardon." "Get up? I have been told to move you." "Well, I shan't go," Catherine said, folding her arms defiantly. She knew that if she gave into a moment of weakness, she would never be able to fight back. It was important to maintain her strength. Declan pressed his lips together and sighed. Catherine's heart spiked. Was there a chance for freedom? She realised Declan would catch her if she attempted escape. "I dinna care what ye will or won't dae. I have been told to move ye, and that is what I shall dae. Ye will only be causing trouble for the both of us if ye dinna dae as I say." Without a moment's hesitation, he strode up to Catherine and grabbed her arm, hauling her away. Catherine dug her heels into the ground, but even that wasn't enough to resist the force of his grip. He dragged her across the ground, which made Catherine even angrier. She looked around at the dark land, so frightening, with the jagged branches of the trees forming a perimeter around their camp. The fires crackled nearby, and leering laughter sounded as she was dragged by Declan towards the castle. "Where are you taking me?" she demanded, but Declan would not speak. He barely turned to look at her, and Catherine truly feared for her life. If he killed her in the darkness of night, it was unlikely that her screams would be heard over the revelry. But surely Sarah would not let her die. Then again, Catherine didn't know the true Sarah. The woman she had come to know had been a facade, an illusion, and there was no telling what she was capable of. If she could betray her heritage and fall in love with a Highlander, was it so difficult to believe that she could want Catherine dead? Perhaps Catherine had been too hasty in declaring her enmity. Maybe the two Highlanders, Blair and Drew, thought she was too much of a liability and would only cause trouble. Surely they had control and would do whatever they liked, without having to consult the women. Fear began to rise through her body. Sweat beaded on her temples as she realised that these could be her last moments in life. Never again would she breathe the air or taste freedom. She stumbled as they moved through the camp and only just about managed to keep her balance. There was no sympathy from Declan either, who pulled her so hard she was sure that her arm would be wrenched from her socket. A whimper fell out of her mouth as her body shuddered and her feet thundered against the ground. All around her were the faces of savages, their heads tossed back, dark mouths open with laughter, thick hair matted with sweat, the stench of beer and roasted meat hanging in the air. She saw more than a few women sitting on the men's laps, their bodies dwarfed by the men's strong paws, clawing at them, and she could only shudder as she thought about what fate lay in store for them. Tears trickled down her cheeks, for she was certain that her end was near. They approached the looming castle, which looked even more foreboding now that she was closer. The grey blocks were smooth and uncaring, uneven, unlike the house in which she had lived all of her life. The air was cold as well, and the tower rose up to touch the stars. Her old house had been beautiful and loving, surrounded by devoted servants and colourful flowers. This was a fortress, a place far from civility, and she didn't understand how any Sassenach lady could willingly live here. "Where are you taking me?" she pleaded, but again Declan wouldn't say. He dragged her in through the door and took her up the steps, her feet echoing against the narrow stone. The winding staircase rose up and up through the castle. Catherine didn't know what horror awaited her. They came to a hallway. Declan dragged her down and then threw her into a room. "Ye will stay here until ye are needed," he said, then slammed the door so loudly that the sturdy walls shook. Catherine wiped tears from her eyes as she dragged herself to the bed. The room in which she found herself was little better than a cell, and a far cry from her chambers at home. The room was largely empty. There was a bed, which was basically a cot with a rough blanket thrown over it. A worn thin rug lay on the floor. A trunk sat in one corner of the room. Catherine ran over to open it, hoping that it would hold something she could make use of, but it was empty. Tilting her head back, Catherine sighed loudly, bemoaning her current situation. She walked across the room to the window and gazed out. Her room was on the rear side of the castle, meaning that she was away from most of the revelry. The horizon stretched out to the north, even further from the land she knew and loved, the land she called home. What she gazed upon was a land of horror, of nightmares and death. The darkness of night lay upon it like a cloak, but even in the light, she was sure that it would hold nothing for her other than bleak despair. Even being alive was small comfort, for her mind was brimming with dreadful thoughts of what could befall her when held captive in this nasty land. There were so many people at fault for this, and none of them were her. Sarah, the Highlanders, even her brother for bringing her to war in the first place, were all to blame, and now she was the only one suffering. It just wasn't fair. Tearing herself away from the window, Catherine tried to maintain her steely resolve, but she was glad for a few moments of respite. While she was hidden in this room, she did not have to play the role of a tough woman. She could let the fear come up and indulge her weakness. Sinking into the bed, she let the tears burst out of her. They flowed as easily as the ale outside, but her whimpers did not carry out of the window like the sounds of laughter that rose and surrounded her, offering her a constant reminder that she was a stranger in a strange land. She tried to sleep, hoping that it would take away her fear, but slumber would not come. The bed was hard underneath her body, and her bones began to ache. The revelry began to die down, the noises around her fading, although some of the Highlanders stayed awake the entire night. Catherine looked at the walls around her with envy. Somewhere inside, Sarah and Rosemary were there with her, warm and comfortable, yet still so far from her. She wondered why she had been thrown in this barren room if Sarah wielded enough influence to get her captured in the first place. It would be one of the many questions Catherine would ask when she saw Sarah again. It was tempting to try and break free of the room to find them and get these matters dealt with immediately. The window was too narrow to climb through comfortably, and even if she did manage to squirm through, there were no ledges upon which to land. It was a sheer drop to the ground, and death would be certain. Catherine walked to the door, pressing her head against it to try and hear anything from the other side. The guard, Declan, was sound asleep. Catherine shook her head in disbelief. If this was the best kind of guard they could find for her, then it amazed her that they were ever able to defeat her brother in battle in the first place. It almost deserved an escape. Since she couldn't sleep, Catherine tested the doorknob, but it was locked firm. There was no way out, but there would be a way eventually, though. Of that she was sure. "Well, Catherine, this is the biggest test you've ever faced, but you'll find a way out, and then you'll make these Highlanders pay," she vowed. Harold had fallen in battle, but she was still alive, and she would make her father proud. With that last thought, she returned to the uncomfortable bed and pulled the scratchy blanket over her, wincing at the feel of it against her soft skin. She closed her eyes and prayed that the following day would be better than this one, and that she would be able to find out what Sarah's true plan for her was. If she could just reason with her, then perhaps she could convince the Highlanders to let her go. If she could make it back to England, then she could tell her father all she knew and help to defeat the Highlanders once and for all. And he looked forward to seeing her again. Somehow he would prove to her that he was a man she could be proud of, that he was better than Blair and would give her the life she needed. He just wasn't sure how to go about it. The rebellion they had been planning against Blair due to his marriage to Rosemary, an English gal, seemed to have died in its infancy when Drew sided with Blair. Deirdre and Old Will thought that Drew was integral to the success, but now that Drew was firmly allied with Blair, there seemed little chance for the two brothers to be broken up. Declan was quietly relieved. The idea of a rebellion had never sat easily with him, but he still wished to make his cousins see how they had lost their minds. A full rebellion had always struck Declan as a last resort, and even now it seemed to be too drastic. But he just wanted to get Drew and Blair's attention, to make them see that their actions were wrong. Although he wanted to leave his post and breathe in the fresh air outside, he was afraid of how Drew might react if he found out he did. Instead, he walked down to the end of the hallway and peered out of the window. The warriors Blair had summoned from the various clans to fight the English were already departing. Many of them embraced each other, glad to have done battle. They were all amicable now, but Declan had a feeling it was just a matter of time before they were at war with each other again. The petty squabbles over land and other matters often took hold of the Highlanders. Nobody dared attack his father, though. Declan hoped that one day he would be treated with as much respect as his father was. His father, who was Aoife's younger brother, had been wounded in the First War, surviving with only one leg, and could not participate in the recent battle. Nonetheless, he was regarded as a living legend in the Highlands. He was at home in a small hamlet across the valley. Declan wanted to make him proud and live the life of a warrior that had been denied to his father. Below him, he watched the banners depart one by one, although some still remained, wanting to enjoy the feasting even longer. There were plenty of men, some of whom would surely be unimpressed that Drew and Blair had taken English women to their chambers and treated them as equals. Now that the battle was over, it was time for old differences to emerge, and perhaps Declan could sway some of them into confronting his cousins. If he could have influence over the McCall Clan, it would go a long way to making his father proud. Then he could enjoy the same respect as Blair, Drew, and restore the Highlanders to their pure blood and not have to worry about the enemy lurking within the camp. Staring back at the door, Declan rested his hand on his blade. He had to be patient and wait. There was plenty of time for him to achieve all he wanted to. He was younger than his cousins, and he had strength, and that was all of the advantage he ever needed to make things work in his favour. Declan returned to his post, waiting all morning for someone to arrive and relieve him, but nobody came. He was unable to slake his thirst, and his stomach was beginning to rumble. All morning long he paced up and down the hallway. More than a few hours had passed since he had risen, and by that point he had had enough of it. He was not going to be forgotten in this manner, and since this Catherine was locked up nice and tightly, he saw no harm in leaving to go and get some food. Now that some time had passed, Declan had a calmer mind and a fresher way of looking at things. His mood the previous night had been influenced by the alcohol, and he was a little ashamed of how he had acted towards his prisoner. For a man his age, 25, he was going through the throes of maturity forged by the war. He had been thrust into a battle that transformed his mind and made him see things he had never seen before. He was changing, that much he could tell. Yet, He was so unsure of who he was changing into. But he wanted so badly to be around all the other Highlanders. It felt as though the world was passing him by, and he wasn't sure how to go about changing that. All he wanted was to be engaged in the process. So much was changing, and he wasn't sure if he could adapt to the new order that Drew and Blair seemed to be implementing. Walking through the castle, Declan kept an eye out for Drew or Blair, but saw no sign of them. He continued outside, his stomach giving him trouble. He could hear the noise from his post and wanted to be a part of it, so he went out and got some meat to fill his belly. Looking around, Declan gazed in awe at the hardened warriors around him. In the midst of the warriors, he thought himself a boy. The sight of them filled him with a deep respect. He longed to be a part of them, to be looked at upon with the same respect as they looked at each other. Women emerged from their tents as well, looking tousled and rough. Declan blushed at the sight of them, especially when they smiled at him. Declan heard snippets of conversation as he made his way through the camp, wanting to soak in as much as possible before all the clans left. As he moved, he held his tongue, cowed by the reputation of all the older warriors. But when he heard one conversation, he could not remain silent. An older man with a thick black beard was heralding the feats of Drew against Lord Flynn. The man's bald head gleamed under the morning sun, and his words carried on the air. Never had there been such a display of sheer power than in that battle. I was with Drew every step of the way, watching how he feinted and drew that Sassenach bastard in, then the killing blow. He thrust a fist into the air and laughed uproariously. The others around him joined in. Declan rolled his eyes, for he had heard plenty about this fight already. Seeing Drew in battle had been a privilege, but Declan wished that he was spoken about in such a manner. Drew wasn't that impressive, he muttered under his breath. What was that, lad? The man asked. Declan froze. He didn't think anyone had been paying him attention, so it took him by surprise to be challenged like this. Well, gae on, what did ye mean? Dae ye nae think that Drew was mighty? Oh, my cousin did indeed show a great deal of bravery against Lord Flynn, but dinna ye think ye are giving him a wee bit too much credit? He is just a man after all, and from what I saw he wasn't always in control. Are ye praising the Sassenach? Nay, I would never, but I would nae be so quick to believe that Drew is the only good swordsman. I'm sure that I could have beaten Lord Flynn if I was given the chance, and I am only sorry that the battle ended so quickly. I was waiting to fight side by side with my cousins. The man looked at him, then laughed. Declan's cheeks darkened. Who are ye to show me such dishonour? He said in a terse voice. They call me Mont, the big man said, his rumbling baritone powerful enough to shake the ground. And I dinna mean to show ye disrespect, but ye get what ye give in this world, and ye seem quick to speak against your cousin. Nay, I love my cousin, and I am proud of him. I only wish that I had been given the chance to prove myself in battle against the Sassenach villain, Declan said. The debate had gathered a little attention among the people around him, and Mont seemed amused by the steel that Declan was showing. Ye think ye would be able to best Lord Flynn? Even though he was Sassenach, I had to give him respect. He was blessed with talent, which makes Drew's victory all the more impressive. Dae ye think ye could even win while suffering the same wound as Drew? I was fighting in that battle for as long as I could. If Drew had nae returned, I would have taken up the fight for him. I would have done my cousin proud. Mont laughed. Did you see the same duel as I? Flynn's blade slashed as quickly as a whip. Why, I believe Drew is the best swordsman this land has seen since the Blue Thistle. And as much as I admire your enthusiasm, I would nae like to see a pup like ye gae up against a swordsman like the Sassenach man. The who? Declan asked. Mont looked at him with astonishment. Have ye nae heard of the Blue Thistle? What are we teaching the wee lads and lasses? He said, looking round. The other people chuckled softly. I'm just about on my last legs. Come back later and I'll give ye a tale for the ages, he promised. Ah, speak of the devil, Mont said and looked up. The others around them gasped. Declan looked around and saw Drew storming towards him. What are ye daying here, Declan? I told you to guard Catherine, he thundered, his face a picture of anger. Declan groaned inwardly. I was hungry, cousin. I only came down here to eat. She is locked up. There is nae danger of her escaping. I left the key by the door, he said. Ye hae to take your duty seriously, Declan. Stay here if you like, but it may be best for you to gae on home and be with your father. Ye have been through a lot. We love having ye here, but we would understand if you wanted to return home, Drew said, his anger diminishing. Drew turned and made his way back to the castle, leaving Declan with a festering shame inside. Declan wished that he could do something to make his cousins proud of him, to ensure that his name would be spoken in the same breath as the rest of the McCalls. Drew and Blair cast long shadows. All Declan wanted was to live up to their reputations. Chapter 3. Catherine awoke with an aching back. Immediately she threw off the scratchy blanket and stretched out her body, feeling her joints click as she did so. She almost hoped that this entire episode had been a nightmare, and she would awaken to find herself back in her comfortable bed at home, waking up to the smell of lavender instead of the damp smell of this Highland castle. The sun streamed in through the narrow window, offering a dim light. Catherine's plight hadn't seemed to change any. She walked around the room and listened at the door. There were no sounds. She called out, but there was no answer, and there didn't seem to be any food either. Had they forgotten about her? Was this how her life was going to end, being starved in a tower? Walking to the window, she peered out again. The land looked different in the daylight, but no less fearsome. Terrible thoughts played on her mind about the beast that must lurk deeper north, waiting to strike. A shadow lay across the land, the valleys and hills looking mysterious. It was an uncivilized, wild land, much like the people who inhabited it. A far cry from the home she was used to, and the longing in her heart was fierce. At that moment, Catherine was uncertain if she would be alive long enough to see her home again, and, for all its faults, she realised how much she missed it. What she wouldn't give now to be married to some old duke if it meant that she was safe. Anything was better than being here. She looked down to see if she had misjudged the drop the previous night. She pushed her arms through the window and decided that if she pushed herself enough, she could wriggle through and escape to the open air. She'd be left with a few bruises on her body, but the main difficulty was that there was nothing to climb to. The tower was a sheer drop, and the castle wasn't even like the castle she had been used to seeing in England. If there had been a moat, she might take her chances, knowing that the water could break her fall. But if she jumped from this tower, there would be no chance of her surviving. Still, it would prove to be a good last resort if she was left with no other option. The thought of death was more appealing to her than being held captive here, being at the mercy of the Highlanders. "Catherine!" Sarah shouted from the other side of the door, thumping wildly. "Catherine, are you in there?" For a moment, Catherine was tempted to ignore the call. This woman had lied to her, deceived her, and it was hard enough for Catherine to remember that her name was in fact Sarah, and not Rosemary. However, she also knew that she did not have a hope of escaping on her own, and that she would need Sarah's help. Furthermore, Catherine had questions that needed to be answered. "I am, indeed. Is it your doing that I am in this cell?" she asked bitterly. "Cell? Catherine, I tried to get Drew to move you to somewhere more comfortable. I hated the thought of you in that cell outside. You are not a prisoner here. I want you to feel like you are a guest." "Is that why you have locked me in this empty room with nothing but a prickly blanket?" "Catherine, that is just the type of room the Highlanders prefer. you'll find that life is far different from what you're used to. This is ridiculous. Let me see if... Catherine heard Sarah reach out and pick up a key that must have been hanging by the door. At least the guard had left her that small courtesy, so she was not locked in here without hope. Sarah opened the door. Catherine turned her back and retreated to the bed. There was still much distance between them. I am finding that already, but that doesn't mean it will be any less rewarding. I shall be the judge of that, Sarah, or do you have another name today? Catherine knew her words were harsh, but at the moment the only weapon she had was her sharp tongue, and she was going to use it to its full ability, even though she could almost sense how hurt Sarah was. Despite everything, the two of them had formed a strong bond during Sarah's stay, and even though Catherine doubted how much of it was true, some of it was undeniable. Catherine had never had a best friend before, and that was why this betrayal hurt so much, but she wanted to believe that at least some of it was real, if only so that she could say there was a time when she had a true friend. I used another name, but the girl you spent so much time with was me. I am not lying when I tell you that. I wish I could make you see. There is so much that I want to say, but I cannot do it through this door. Where is your guard? I do not know, but I agree with you. We do have much to discuss. Have you eaten? No, I have not. In fact, I have not been given anything. You say that I am a guest, but I do not feel like one. I am being held in this room, locked against my will, given no comforts whatsoever. You may believe you are acting in my best interests by bringing me here, but I do not see how you can justify your actions. So much of her life had been spent dependent on somebody else. Her father and Harold had always had her life planned out, and now she was living at the whim of Sarah, even though she was said to be free. How free, she wondered. Would she be allowed to leave if she expressed the desire? She had been bandied over as a pawn of peace, supposedly for her own good. Well, nobody had actually bothered asking her what she wanted. What right did Sarah have to tear her away from her home and bring her to this forsaken place, where she would have to live out her days among brutes and enemies? Their conversation was interrupted by Drew, the man that Sarah had fallen in love with. Sarah excused herself and walked out of the doorway.
Before we continue into the story, do us a favour. Like this video and hit the subscribe button because it helps very much with YouTube's algorithm. If you want the audiobooks ads free, visit our website and select our bundles to save more. Thank you again. Now back to our story.
Catherine dipped her head but turned her ear towards their conversation. Worried about him. I will have to keep a close eye on him. Is there anything you need? Drew asked. Sarah shook her head. Catherine averted her gaze from the Highlander. He looked like a giant when standing next to Sarah. His muscles bulged and his face was swarthy. Drew looked at Catherine, eyeing her up and down. She could feel the weight of his gaze upon her. She didn't like the sensation of having such a brutish man look at her, as though she was just a common girl. To her relief, he left promptly, and the two women were left together. Sarah had brought a tray with her. There was a bowl filled with a thick broth and a jug of water. I thought you might need some hospitality, Sarah said, placing the tray on the bed. She perched herself on one end and waited for Catherine to sit at the other. Catherine wanted to ignore Sarah and give her the full force of her icy exterior, but her stomach was hungry and her throat was crying out for some water. Slowly, she moved across to the bed and sat as far away from Sarah as she could. Catherine first took a mug of water and sipped it carefully, not wanting to appear a glutton. Manners had been bred into her too much for her to appear like a mindless commoner, and in this castle it was important for her to maintain her dignity and composure. Then, she brought the bowl in front of her and took hold of the spoon. The broth was thick, filled with chunks of meat and vegetables. It was heavy on her stomach, but filled her up quickly, yet all the while she ate, she did not look at Sarah. I do apologise for not doing as you wished. I thought I was doing you a great favour. You told me before how much you deplored the idea of being married off by your father. I thought if I freed you, you could live your own life without having to be shackled to the whims of others. And in doing so, you have proven yourself to be as hard as my father, Catherine said. You acted without consulting me, without giving me any choice in the matter. Did you really believe that I would be happy to go along with this scheme? To say goodbye to my home and my family? To live with the people who killed my brother? Sarah wrung her hands anxiously. Despite the name change, there were so many behaviours that were the same as had been displayed when Sarah had been acting as Rosemary. It was quite disquieting, and Catherine was not sure how much faith she should place in Sarah's words. The matter of your brother's death is not one I wish to speak of, but suffice it to say that none of us would be in this predicament had he not been so hell-bent on war. Would you speak ill of the dead? Perhaps you're happy because now you do not have to marry him. I am, Sarah said softly. You know what kind of man he was, what kind of fate would have been in store for me had I stayed with him. And you think you shall find anything better with these savages? They are not what you imagine them to be, Catherine. There is much that you could learn from them. All that we have been taught is wrong. Believe me, I more than most know how difficult it is to accept this truth, but it is true nonetheless. I was made an orphan by Highlanders, remember, but I have seen that they are not all to blame. Was that story true then? I told you before, Catherine, that only my name was a lie, everything else was true. Our friendship meant a lot to me. So much so that you were willing to run away from it at the first opportunity, Catherine said. Sarah's head dipped and she wiped a tear from her eye. I hope you know that was the most difficult thing I have ever had to do. I was scared for my very life, Catherine. I knew that if my secret was discovered, Lord Flynn would have a terrible fate in store for me. I was on edge every moment I stayed with you, and I knew that I had to leave. The only thing that gave me pause was the thought of leaving you. You had proven yourself to be a true friend to me, and my only regret is that you have been hurt because of all of this. I hoped that by welcoming you into this land, it would make up for some of the suffering I have caused, when in fact it has only caused more suffering. You perhaps do not know me as well as you think, Sarah. The name was still strange on Catherine's tongue. Perhaps I thought you were a kind and compassionate girl, one who would flourish when away from the domineering men in her life. I thought you would seek freedom and welcome the opportunity to forge your own path in life. I hoped that we could rekindle our friendship. I do miss you, Catherine, and there is so much we have to catch up on. Like you and this Highlander. Indeed, Sarah said, and a wicked smile flashed over her face. The look in her eyes was one that Catherine had not seen before, but it was alluring and sparked her curiosity. Catherine was always one for gossip, and she did find herself wondering why and how the demure, innocent Sarah had fallen for the brutish and savage Drew, and how indeed the same thing had happened with her peer, the Lady Rosemary. I suppose it wouldn't be improper for you to regale me with the tale. I might as well get something out of staying here, she said, taking another sip of water. Perhaps if she learned why Sarah had fallen for Drew, it might give her some insight on how to get out of this mess. Sarah's face lit up as she told Catherine of how she and Drew met. I ran to the forest, towards England, hoping I could flee and leave the war behind forever. I wanted a quiet, humble life, far away from all these plots and schemes. I came to a glade, and as I was resting, a horse came upon me carrying a warrior. He was wounded, and I knew that if I did not do anything, he would die. I could not, in all conscience, leave him there, even though he was a Highlander. That was brave of you, Catherine admitted. unable to deny the strength and fortitude Sarah had shown in this matter. I do not believe that I could have done the same thing. No, well, I could hardly believe I was doing it myself, but I did it all the same. I tended to his wounds, and then he woke up. I was afraid that he would do something horrid to me. I was on the very edge of my fear. My heart was beating so viciously, I thought it may very well beat right out of my chest. I actually held his sword to him for fear that he would make a move. It was so heavy, but he was too weak to move. I bathed him, fed him, and I soon saw that he was not a monster at all. For a moment, Catherine thought that Sarah was going to weep. Her head bowed, and she raised a hand to brush away something from her eyes. She had always been too quick to fall into an emotional state. It was really becoming quite tiresome. The things we've been told about them have all been wrong, Catherine. They're not savages at all. They're kind, compassionate people. They're creative, they're passionate, and they're ready to go to war. Are we not the same? Can you really say that the Sassenach are peaceful people when we are the ones who instigated that battle? I had to question many of my preconceptions when I started to get to know Drew and his people, and I believe you should do the same. I shall do no such thing. You have had your mind twisted by his soulful eyes. Sarah, don't you see what is happening here? This is exactly what we've been warned about. This is how they steal Sassenach women. Nobody has stolen me, Sarah said, smiling. I am in my right mind, and I would not choose to be anywhere else. Catherine looked at her in confusion, then looked around the room. Here, in this place? She asked incredulously. Sarah nodded. It is beautiful. You truly have lost your mind because you cannot be seeing the same thing as I. This place is dark and damp, cold and heartless. It lacks everything that I am used to. On the contrary, Catherine, it holds so much more. Do not take offence when I say that Lord Flynn's estate was a very beautiful house, but it was not a home. It was not filled with love, but this place is. In time, you will come to see that, and you will come to see that the Highlanders are just people, just like you and I. They have their foibles, as do we all, but they are hardly the enemy here. I only want for you the same happiness I want for myself. And I shall have it, Sarah, but not in the way you want. My father shall not rest until I am freed. Soon word shall reach him of my capture, and he will lead another army into these lands, and he is a far different prospect than facing Harold. My father is a war veteran, and he will show this place no mercy. I shall not shed a tear when this place is burned to the ground, and all that's left is a pile of ash. Sarah sighed. Then I pity you, Catherine. I did hope that you would see things in the proper way. I thought that given time, well, perhaps that may still happen. I have seen to it that no harm will come to you while you are here. I did hope that we could spend time together like we did before, but it is clear to me that you need more time to adjust. I am sorry that you have to be guarded. That is the one concession I had to make. I will come for you again. Perhaps you, me and Rosemary can go for a walk later, and you can see how beautiful the Highlands truly are. Perhaps, Catherine said, hating the tone of pity that presented itself in Sarah's voice. Sarah rose and looked as though she was about to place a hand on Catherine's shoulder, but she changed her mind at the last moment. Well then, I shall see you later. Please try to let go of the anger inside you, Catherine. I only want what's best for you. With those stinging words, Sarah left. A dark cloud lingered over Catherine's head, and she scowled as she stared at the door. The key turned in the lock, and once again she was shut in, unable to escape. Sarah wanted what was best for her. All her life, people had wanted what was best for her without ever asking her first. With little else to do, Catherine moved to the window again and gazed outside. enjoying the feeling of the fresh air upon her skin. For a moment, she closed her eyes and could almost pretend that she was at home again, looking out upon the gardens, breathing in their sweet fragrance. But the illusion was quickly dispelled, as when she inhaled, she only smelled mead, ash, and cooked meat. It was not a place for a lady. Opening her eyes, she turned her gaze to the sky and looked at a flock of birds spreading their wings, soaring high. How she envied them, being able to go wherever they wished. Was this to be her life? Even when her father came for her, he would only take her back with him and marry her off to some noble. It was the life she had always known she would lead, but it was not the one she wanted. Yet, when she questioned what life she did want, she found herself drawing a blank. There weren't many ways in which she envied Sarah, but this was certainly one. The handmaiden had a strong sense of her own identity and her own place in the world. For better or worse, she had taken command of her own destiny and had forged her own path. Somehow, Catherine would find a way to do the same. But first, she would make every one of these Highlanders pay, starting with the man who dragged her here and guarded her. Chapter 4. Declan sighed as Drew left, wishing that he could have gotten his point across a little better. In Drew's eyes, he had not performed his duty admirably, and there was nothing Declan liked less than not being seen as responsible in the eyes of his cousin. Then, he became aware that the Highlanders around him saw him as something of a jest. Drew had just left, and the others around Declan were all stifling their laughter at the way Drew had scolded Declan. "I am surprised he didn't put you over his knee and give you a good old spanking," Mont said, his entire body shaking with laughter. Declan glowered. He knew Drew hadn't meant it in that manner, but he wanted to be seen as a legend by the Highlanders, not as a figure of fun. His body bristled with tension, and he wanted to break something, but there was nothing around, and he certainly wasn't going to get into a fight with Mont. Drew must be angry at something else. Maybe he's starting to see that he should nae have brought that Sassenach lass back with him. Perhaps she is nae as fun now as she was in the woods, Declan said with a wicked smile and an arched eyebrow, trying to imagine what an older man would say in his position. "Oh, aye, the pup thinks he knows what goes on in the woods?" Mont asked. "I know," Declan said, puffing out his chest. Mont smirked, unconvinced. "The point remains that he should nae have brought her back. Dae ye nae agree?" Mont shifted and glanced at his companions. This pleased Declan, for it showed that the matter was still sensitive, and there were still plenty who disagreed with Drew and Blair. And Blair was the same. There are plenty of pretty Scottish lasses around. Why did they nae choose one of them? Mont had no answer for him, but pressed his lips together and leaned forward. "It is their business, boy. Strange things happen in war, far stranger than this. I would nae choose it for myself, but they are men, and they know what they're doing. They're putting the clan in danger. They canny see they are putting themselves in danger as well as the clan. Two lasses are hardly going to cause that much danger. They ha' earned the right to do what they please with their displays in war. Ye should nae be so concerned with what they are doing anyway. Ye are young. Enjoy life." But how could Declan enjoy life when there was so much danger around and nobody was listening to his warnings? It was as though everyone else was blind. Blair and Drew had to realise the danger they were creating. There was no other way to handle the matter. It was simply too much to take. And as Declan glanced around the camp, he was sure that there were at least a handful of loyal warriors who would flock to his side and fight to keep the clan pure. It would have been good to have Mont by his side too, but evidently that was not going to happen. "I will," Declan said, then took his leave. He walked through the camp and observed the people still around. Some were badly wounded and waited for themselves to heal before they left. Others simply enjoyed the company. Other men sat alone, staring into nothingness. The brutal reality of war changed some men. All the Highlanders had charged into battle fiercely. but not all of them had shared the same ardour after having experienced battle in the front lines. Lots of men had lost friends and family. Some men had lost their minds. Declan had always grown up thinking that his people were the finest warriors in the land, but he was coming to a point in his life where he found that certain truths had been illusions all along. Swords and spears lay strewn around the camp, some still covered in blood, some broken. They had been left as a sign that people did not want to go to war anymore, but perhaps for a good cause they would. People would have to fight for their heritage because it was something worth fighting for, and if they wouldn't, then Declan really didn't know his place in the world. That's if it came to that anyway. He hoped that he wouldn't have to fight. Blair and Drew just needed to see reason. He walked through the camp with purpose, overhearing snippets of conversation here and there. Many people retold the story of how Drew had defeated the Sassenach Lord, and Declan winced every time. Would there ever be stories like that told of him? He left the camp behind and went into the forest, walking through the bracken and bramble until he came to a glade. The air was fresh with the smell of summer, and the sight of birds was apparent through the gaps in the trees. Declan found Deirdre lying in a sunny spot, her flame-red hair splaying out over the green grass, the curves of her body settling nicely against the moss. Declan took a moment to enjoy the sight, and wondered how any red-blooded Highlander could ever prefer a fragile Sassenach rose to this beautiful Scottish flower. As Declan moved nearer, Deirdre heard him and cracked open an eye. Upon seeing him, she pushed herself up and leaned on one elbow, her loose clothes barely covering her flesh. Declan's eyes lingered on the valley of her cleavage, the long legs and the heaven that lay between them. Desire stirred within him as echoes of sensation surged through his body, memories of all they had done together. "Have you come for another lesson?" Deirdre asked seductively. Declan was tempted to fall onto the ground beside her and lose himself in her arms again. Her body was an instrument of temptation, and she knew how to use it to its full effect. She had taught him many things in these woods, had made him a man, and Declan would be forever grateful for that. "Perhaps later. I had too much on my mind," he said regretfully. "Oh, is my little warrior troubled?" she said. Declan frowned at her pet name for him. "That name used to be sweet, but now it only serves to feed my resentment," he said tersely. The playful smile fell from Deirdre's face. She took Declan's hand and pulled him to the ground to sit beside her, then placed an arm around his shoulder. Her scent was sweet, and the warmth of her body was welcome. "What troubles you, Declan?" she asked seriously. "This whole world troubles me. Nothing makes sense anymore. That battle was supposed to be an opportunity to win glory. Instead, nothing has changed. Nobody looks at me any differently. It was all ended in one fell swoop by Drew. And now, nobody thinks to question him or Blair about their women. Nobody cares about the threat they pose. Aye, it was a dark battle, and I knew how you feel. Nobody would listen to me when I tried to warn them. It is a sad day when we see how our people are ending. Nobody seems to care about the Sassenach infection spreading through our clan. Even Fianna has been driven mad with despair after Ifa's death and has nae been able to talk sense into her sons. We have to stop it, Deirdre. If we are the only ones who see sense, then so be it. I just need to talk with them when they are clear of mind. I have long waited for a man of your passion, but perhaps you need today more than speak with them. You need to rally the others to the cause. You need today as much as you can for the sake of the clan. Deirdre whispered in his ear, and we will teach Blair a lesson. He will soon learn that he should never have scorned me. Is that all ye care about? There are more important things than your ego. Do ye really think a fight is what we need? I just need to speak with them. The time for speaking is over, Deirdre said, her eyes blazing with fury. Blair and Deirdre's turbulent relationship had been the subject of much gossip, especially from Deirdre herself. Declan hated comparing himself to his cousins, knowing that he would fall short. Deirdre had not said anything explicitly, but Declan was certain that in many ways he would never measure up to either Drew or Blair. Declan had hoped that by now he would have been able to drive the memory of Blair from Deirdre's mind, but she still clung onto the bitter spite. Part of him wasn't even sure what was really going on with Deirdre. She had been the only woman to ever take an interest in him, and yet she seemed elusive on occasion. Declan wasn't entirely sure where they stood or how he felt. I'm just a boy and naebody cares. Dare ye ever feel like ye had greatness within ye, but naebody can see it? Declan asked. For however confusing their relationship was, Declan felt comfortable confiding in her. Aye, Deirdre said and kissed him on the cheek. Declan barely noticed the gesture. His thoughts turned to the future and a life wasted, fearing that if he did not take matters into his own hands soon, he would fade into obscurity and be unable to take part in the battles like his father. Declan stood up and pulled Deirdre up and along with him, then began to march back into the camp. Where are you going? She asked. To make sure something happens, he said. With determination in his eyes, Declan moved forward and went to Old Will's hut. The old man had been alive for far longer than anyone else Declan knew. He was a font of wisdom and carried much respect from the clan. He had taught AIAF and, in turn, taught Blair, Drew and Declan. In recent years, he had become more of a hermit, focusing on his herbs and parchments. Declan burst through the door and found Old Will leafing through some old parchments. The old man turned to them, his beady eyes looking at Declan with great interest. He had a stooped back and shuffled rather than walked as he greeted his guests. I did nae expect to see the two of ye here, Old Will said. I am tired of all this talk. We must gae and talk to Drew and Blair now, Declan said firmly. Old Will sighed and groaned. Every movement he made seemed to take much out of him. There is nae point any more. Without Drew's backing, we hae nae hope. We simply must accept fate as it is. Drew and Blair have made their decisions, and we can dae nothing about it. I will nae accept that, Declan said, with such vehemence that Deirdre and Old Will were startled. We dinna need Drew. We hae me. I can convince them. Declan saw the glance that passed between the old man and Deirdre, and it stabbed at his soul. I had done everything ye asked, and yet ye still dinna believe that I have it in me. What do ye think of me? I can be just as good as anyone in battle, and I can make Blair and Drew realise that they should never have brought Sassenach lasses here. Old Will hung his head, his wispy white hair trembling a little as he moved. Ye are like your father, always hot-blooded, Old Will said, always ready to charge. Ye know that is how he was wounded. My father was a great warrior, Declan said tersely. Oh, aye, that he was, but he was also tae eager. If he had just been more patient, well, that is a matter for the gods, I suppose. Declan, ye are a wee lad. What do you hope to accomplish? It was going to be hard enough to tell Blair he is wrong, let alone the both of them. There are people who know the truth of what we speak. There are those out there who will rally around you for the pride of the Highlands, Deirdre said. Aye, and there are plenty of men who will fight for the men who prove themselves in battle. Blair and Drew inspire much loyalty, more than ye hae. I think it is time to let this matter rest, the old man said wisely, giving Deirdre a strange look. It pains me to see things gae this way, but it is the way of the world to change. Perhaps I'm just too old. This world is nae mine any longer. Dinna speak like that. Dinna accept defeat so easily. We can make them see the error of their ways. We just need to be smart. We can make them see that what they're doing is nae right, Deirdre said, getting more and more agitated. Declan looked at her and wondered if he had been so desperate. He looked at Old Will imploringly, but saw the resignation in Old Will's eyes. Are ye sure ye can offer nae aid? Lad, ye should nae see only one course of action before ye. There is much to be done in this life. Get back to your father. Spend some time together. Get him to tell ye about his battles. I'm doing this for my father. I'm doing this for all of us. Then, I fear ye must do it by yourself, Old Will said sadly, turning his back to Declan. At my age, I ha' gained much wisdom, and part of that is never to enter a fight I cannae win. I am sorry ye cannae see that. But maybe ye will learn a harsh lesson. Declan stormed out with Deirdre by his side, fury building within him. I cannae believe him, Declan said. Deirdre remained silent, a pensive look on her face. Well then, it is just the two of us, Deirdre said. That old man is a fool. We should nae have involved him in the first place. This is a matter for the young. Ye should be proud, Declan, proud to be the one to lead the clan soon. Blair and Drew dinna know what is best for the clan any more. Ye are the only one who can make a difference. Go to the others. Tell them what we need today. Then march into that castle and take this clan. Deirdre's words were impassioned, but they failed to sway Declan. He had been among the other Highlanders and knew there was no way they were going to listen to him. If he was going to convince Blair and Drew of the danger these Sassenach girls posed, he was going to have to do it alone. Old Will spoke some sense, Declan said. Perhaps this isn't the way forward. I cannae believe ye of all people are saying this. Old Will I can understand. He is an old man, and Disney need the trouble, but yeah? After all ye have said about Blair, you would really stop. Deirdre spat. Declan shrugged. Ye ask too much of me, Deirdre. Ye are too angry. This is nae a matter of fighting. We need to talk, and the more people we hae to talk, the better. Ye should be angry, Declan. I wish there was another way. This could have worked before the Sassenach attacked, but when they did, all our hope was lost. I dinna believe the Highlanders will be so quick to take up arms again. If ye do nothing now, you will hae to get used to Sassenach lasses living with us, but I am nae going to talk with them. The time for words is done. We'll see about that. If I had to do it by myself, then so be it, he said, storming away from Deirdre, unable to believe that she would really forsake him in his moment of need. All he wanted was to make Blair and Drew see sense. Deirdre seemed to want to take it further. It was a shame that she took this so personally, rather than wanting what was best for the clan. His words would have carried more weight if he had been flanked by Deirdre and Old Will, but their absence was not going to stop him. Whenever he needed anyone, they always let him down. Sometimes he thought it might be preferable to live as a hermit, where he didn't have to worry about anyone else. But that wasn't his destiny. He was to live a life of adventure and glory, to live a life that both he and his father would be proud of. There was no time like the present to begin. With a fearsome stirring in his heart, Declan strode through the camp and approached all the remaining clans for their aid. It did not go as he had planned. When he approached them, he had to remind them who he was, for none of them seemed to recognize him, which only increased his anger. Again and again he was laughed away by seasoned warriors who saw nothing but a boy. Why did they not see what he was? In the end, he returned empty-handed. Nobody wanted to join him in facing Drew and Blair for various reasons. Some did not care to be told what to do by a boy, and others did not have a problem with what Blair and Drew were doing. Declan was alone, and for the first time in his life he knew what that fully meant. His father would never have sanctioned his actions, and nobody else was paying him any attention. He had nobody to rely on, no friends to even talk to. Even Deirdre had forsaken him. She was probably working on some other scheme to get her revenge on Blair. The woman had never been in it for the proper reasons anyway, not to restore the pride of the clan. She had only been in it for her own ends, and would rather destroy the clan than be its salvation. Declan would have to keep an eye on her, not like old Will. There was a true patriot, and it was a sad thing to see him give up so meekly. But old age had to come to them all. Will could perhaps have helped Declan talk some sense into the McCall brothers, their words given the weight of his wisdom. One day it would come to Declan too, if he was fortunate to live that long, and when it did, he did not want to look back on his life with regret. Every fibre of his being told him that this was the only way to get glory, and that he had to do so sooner rather than later. He did not want to end up like old Will or his father, two men who hadn't had the required fortitude to do what had to be done, and instead were left languishing until death claimed them. So, even though Declan had nobody beside him, he strode into the castle, determined to face Blair and Drew. This had to be done. He could no longer stand by and watch the entire clan fall into ruin. If he was the only one willing to stand up for justice, then so be it. But he would do what was right, because he was a Highlander, and he was proud of his heritage. He made his way to the Great Hall. Blair, Drew, Rosemary, and Sarah were all there. Before he went in, he overheard them talking about a girl, most likely the prisoner he was supposed to be guarding. "Ah, there you are. Why are you nae at your post?" Drew asked. Declan marched up to the thrones, disgusted at the sight of the Sassenach women sitting upon them. "I ha' business with ye," Declan said. Drew and Blair cast a glance at each other. "Then say your piece," Blair said. "I am here to challenge your actions. I dinna believe that ye are acting in the best interests of the clan by having those lasses sitting by your side. I cannae stand by and watch you destroy all that our fathers built." Drew cocked an eyebrow at him, but it was not one of Declan's cousins who answered him directly. Rather, it was Rosemary. "Excuse me, what is your name?" she asked. "Declan," he said in a surly manner, barely deigning to look at her. "And why, exactly, do you have a problem with our presence here?" She opened her palm, gesturing towards Sarah, who looked a little embarrassed. Declan felt his cheeks redden. He was not sure what he had expected from this endeavour, but this was certainly not it. "It is nae a problem with ye personally, ye see, but with the general principle. We ha' long been enemies with the Sassenach. Say to her two lasses sitting on our thrones is difficult to see. This is nae how we live, and it is wrong. Blair and Drew had gone against everything we believe in. I find it curious that you refer to we when you are standing alone. Are there others who feel this way?" Declan shifted uncomfortably, moving the weight between his feet. He bowed his head slightly and cleared his throat, then tilted his head up to meet her sparkling blue eyes. "It does no matter whether anyone stands with me or nay. I had hoped they would, but they are tired of fighting for the moment. I will stand up for what I believe in, though, and I will nae let this matter rest until it has been resolved." "And how dare ye see it being resolved, Declan?" Drew said slowly, looking at him evenly. Declan searched his mind, but he quickly realised how immature he was being. He had stormed into this castle without any thought of the future. There was much for Declan to learn. There were so many things he wanted to say, but the words caught in his throat, and it was as though he had a mouth filled with glass. At Declan's silence, Blair threw back his head and laughed uproariously. He laughed so hard that tears began to flow from his eyes, and he almost shook his body from his chair. Declan's face darkened, annoyed that once again he was not being given the proper respect. Before he could say anything to that effect, however, Rosemary placed her hand on Blair's arm. "Calm down, my love. Can't you see that he is serious? This may amuse you, but there is nothing funny about it to him, and we must treat him with respect. He is your cousin, after all." Declan was surprised that Rosemary was perhaps the only person who actually gave voice to his feelings, although he hated that she seemed quite reasonable. It would have been far easier to hate the both of them if the Sassenach women were cruel hags. "Declan, can ye nae see the madness of this? Ye are standing alone, telling us how to live our lives. Gae back to your father, spend some time with him. I know I wish I had spent more time with mine when he was alive. Find some peace. Ye are too young to be filled with such anger. Ye are going to be a great warrior one day. Dinna rush it," Blair said. "And if ye dae wish to stay, ye know where duty lies," Drew added. The two of them then turned to each other and spoke in low tones, as if that was the matter settled. Declan stared at them furiously and felt impotent anger rise within him. They acted as though he wasn't there, as though that was the end of it, and he knew deep in his heart that it was. Still, he stood there for a few moments more, until they noticed that he hadn't left. After one long glance, Declan turned on his heels and walked away. At first, he thought about doing as they said and leaving for his home, but that felt as though he was taking a step back. Life was supposed to move forward, and anything important was going to happen here. He wanted to be alone too, and didn't want to be faced with the ridicule of the people he'd tried to convince to join him when he confronted his cousins. So, he ascended the stairs and went to guard the prisoner again. At least it was out of the way, and he wouldn't have to be humiliated any further. The only thing that had surprised him was how reasonable Rosemary had been. He'd been avoiding them for the most part, not wanting to give them any unwarranted attention, but she had seemed the most level-headed out of all of them. She had the manner of a queen, but she wasn't a Highlander and didn't deserve to rule in these parts. Chapter 5. Catherine had been sitting alone for a little while after Sarah had left, wondering what she was going to do with her days. She thought on Sarah's words and wondered if it wasn't worth adjusting her attitude a little, just for the sake of actually getting out of this room and being allowed some freedom of movement. She wished now that she had spent more time in the dungeons of the estate and observed the prisoners that Harold kept there, to glean some idea of how they coped with captivity. Harold did have a cruel streak, and while he usually favoured executing prisoners, there were some he chose to keep alive as trophies. Some men had been down there for years and had quite likely gone mad. Catherine wondered if she would lose her mind if she was held long enough. It certainly wouldn't do her any good to stay here. Playing on Sarah's good nature was a viable strategy. Catherine could pretend that all was forgiven and that she was willing to open her mind to a life here before finding an opportunity to escape. Yet it still seemed wrong to manipulate Sarah like that, even though Sarah herself had lied to Catherine over and over again. Still, Sarah had done that out of self-preservation. Now that Catherine had had some time to think on the matter, she realised that it had been Sarah's only recourse. If she had revealed the truth, Harold would have been incensed and likely kept her as one of his trophies. She seemed the same sweet, sincere girl as well. But Catherine didn't know if she could ever forgive her for what she had done. Her thoughts were interrupted by a noise at the door. It sounded as though someone had slumped against it. "Sarah?" she called out, although the weight of the body seemed far too much for Sarah. It was more likely to be the insolent guard who had dragged her to this room in the first place. "Who is there? I demand to know!" she cried, annoyed that whoever was behind the door was not speaking to her. Fear rippled through her mind. For all of Sarah's guarantees, Catherine did not feel safe in this place. "Be quiet, I'm trying to think," a voice said, muffled through the door, but clear. Catherine made her way to the door and sank down, resting her back against it. "Oh, it's you again. I was hoping it would be someone who had good conversation." I can talk about anything you like. We are nae dumb brutes up here. Really? Then let us talk about maths or literature, Catherine said. Declan cursed. I thought not. Ye think ye are sae superior to us. Ye are wrong. We can date anything ye can. I am quite sure, like, get drunk and fall asleep. Who are you, anyway? Are you the servant boy around here? Servant boy, he exclaimed. Catherine smiled, for she had evidently touched a nerve. I am nae servant boy. I am a warrior. And why is a warrior stuck on guard duty? Because people dinna appreciate me. At least they have the good sense to lock ye up, nae like the others. The others? You mean Rosemary and Sarah? Aye, your friends. They are no friends of mine, of that I can assure you. If I had my way, I would be far away from here, in a comfortable room with a feast laid out for me. This is just about the worst place I could imagine myself being. It is more than ye deserve. Why? Because I'm Sassenach. Aye! I fail to see what that has to do with anything. I am a Sassenach lady, not a soldier. I had no part to play in that battle, and it is highly unfair of you to keep me here. Sarah made a mistake, one that she will rectify shortly, I am sure. Soon I shall be on my way home, and I will never have to hear your terrible voice again. I wish all three of ye would gae home. Life would be much simpler. We would nae have to worry about what ye can do to us. What we can do? There's not much I can do from behind this door. I fail to see why you are so worried about a few Sassenach girls running amok in the Highlands. The only danger you have from me is from my father, who will be coming presently to rescue me. Of course, when this door opens, I may well kick your shins, but that is hardly ladylike. Why do we cause so much fear in you? A few moments of silence passed as Declan seemed to be considering his answer. Catherine pictured his face in her mind. Young and handsome, he was unlike the other monstrous Highlanders, but he was hardly a gentleman either. Of course, there was some physical attraction there, purely a primal thing, but there was no culture, and she was quite sure that he would never be able to hold a sophisticated conversation. The thought of him at a dinner party brought Catherine great amusement, although at this moment she stifled a laugh. I fear what ye can dae. Ye hae ways of making men dae what ye want, and that can nae happen to the clan. We ha' always feared Sassenach rule, but is this nae another way of that happening? Blair has already changed because of Rosemary's influence. Can we truly call ourselves Highlanders if we let you make decisions for us? I just want you to leave us alone. You'll get no argument from me there. I wish my brother had never thought to take me to that wretched battle. Still, I don't see why it should bother you too much. There are plenty of other clans as far as I understand it. Why not go to one of them? Ye dinna understand. This is my clan, this is my family. I have a duty to them, a connection. I could gae to other clans, but it would nae be the same. Would ye be happy to live as a stranger somewhere else? No, and that is precisely why I wish to leave. I will have words with Sarah soon and make it clear to her that I do not want to stay. She keeps saying that I am not a prisoner. Well, if that is true, then I should be allowed to leave whenever I wish. Ye can wish all ye like, but it is doubtful that is going to happen. I'd prefer ye to leave tea. At least then I would nae hae to guard ye. Then let me out, Catherine said frantically, sensing a sliver of hope from the man. Free me and let me run away. We can make it look like it was an accident. I'll flee to England and you'll never have to worry about me again. Declan laughed. Do ye take me for a fool? I thought you might be smart enough to see an opportunity. I am smart enough to know that I have already done enough to bring the wrath of my cousins down on me, he said. Ye shall be staying here for a while longer yet. and I suppose I am stuck with you as my guard. It seems that we are both being punished. There are many places I would rather be. I am sure, like hunting or the like. I have to be honest with you, Declan. I am going quite mad here. Is there nothing that can be done to alleviate my suffering? Are there no books around here that I can at least distract myself with? Old Will has some documents. I dinna know if I would call them books, though. Oh, this is just the worst. What did I ever do to be stuck here? Is this really that bad? Are you serious? Do you even realise that you're living in squalor? No, I suppose you don't, do you? Tell me, Declan, have you ever been to England? Nay, nor do I wish to. Well, you are missing out. The estates there are lavish, like little towns of their own. There are tapestries hanging from the wall, books from all over the world on shelves. There is stimulation everywhere. It is quite impossible to get bored. There are games too, and I find myself wondering what you do to occupy your time. We hunt, we fight, we tend to the crops and cook our meals. Oh, that sounds rather boring. We have servants who prepare our meals for us. Then, ye are missing out on the satisfaction ye feel when ye prepare a meal of your own. Where is the sense of accomplishment ye get? When I hunt an animal, I know I have earned that meal, and it makes it taste all the sweeter. It must be an easy life to have everything done for ye, but it canny be rewarding. I'll have you know it's plenty rewarding. There are loftier ambitions for the spirit than just tending to the land. It's important to educate one's mind. And where did that lead ye? Right here. Your education did nae day ye much good. Well, that's because I was fooled, and it takes the right person to appreciate it. I am looking forward to returning home, where I can be in proper company and discuss matters of importance with people who understand them. Ye seem to be sure that ye are going to be rescued. Can ye be so confident? Indeed, Catherine said, inclining her head. The thought that her father would not come to her aid had never crossed her mind. Father would never forsake me. He will be further incensed that my brother was killed as well. I find it amusing how the lot of you are so content in thinking the fight is over when it has not truly begun. We have beaten ye once. We can day it again. Then our victory shall be all the sweeter. If I were you, I'd return home and tend to your fields, because it will be a massacre, and I doubt that many of you will survive. I canna, he said. There seemed to be a weight to his words that belied his young years. What do you mean? Are you so tied to your duty that you have no choice but to fight? Perhaps you are just as much a prisoner here as I am. It is, nay, say simple. My father was wounded in the last war. He canny fight, and it pains him greatly. If I chose nae to fight, it would bring him great shame. Shame I could nae bear. I hae to earn honour and glory for the both of us. For the first time during their conversation, Catherine found herself directly interested in his feelings as a person, not just in using him to pass the time. Their sniping had been enjoyable, but the conversation was taking a heavier turn. Declan, do you actually want to go to war? There was a heavy breath before he answered. I dae. It is natural for Highlanders to want to fight. I want to make my name on the battlefield and remind everyone of my father's glory. I need to protect the land and earn my glory, else I shall be forgotten, and my life will be worth nothing. Life is never worth nothing, no matter what you do. What I mean to say is that if you had a choice, is there nothing else you would rather do? My father told me when I was younger that our way is war. He said we should be proud to serve our clan and defend it no matter who attacks. The greatest honour we can hae is to prove ourselves in battle, to test our strength against our enemies and emerge triumphant. I have spent my life trying to live up to my father's standards, and I can only hope that I get the opportunity. Would you rather not stand by where it is safe? Only cowards refuse war, Declan said bluntly. It was a stark sentiment and one which sent tremors through Catherine's soul, for she realised that the Sassenach and the Highlanders were far more similar than she would have cared to admit. The way you speak reminds me of my brother, she said softly, remembering how eager Harold had been to prove himself against the Highlanders, to show their father that he was worthy of respect. It had led to Harold's death. If only he had been more careful and less hell-bent on getting justice for perceived crimes, then there would have been no battle, and Harold would still be alive. Catherine began to weep. "Dinny day me, the disrespect of comparing me with that coward," Declan said. "Coward? I'll have you know that Harold was brave. He had his faults, but he was a soldier and he fought the good fight," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, as tears spilled down her cheeks. "He was a coward who hid behind his lines until it was too late. Then he tried to scheme his way to victory against Drew. Aye, he was talented with a blade, but he was nay a man of honour." "Stop it! You are horrid!" Catherine said, not wanting to hear the truth about her brother, for she did not want to speak ill of the dead. "I hate it here. I hate it here, and I want to leave. Let me out now," she said, beating her fists against the door. Behind the door, she could hear Declan trying to get her to calm down, but it was no use. Catherine's emotions were high, and she beat her fists until her bones began to ache and her skin was crimson. Before too long, she collapsed in a heap, weeping. Then the door opened. Sarah and Rosemary were there, scooping her up in their arms. They comforted her and took her downstairs outside. Through her blurred vision, Catherine saw Declan standing behind them by the door. Was there a look of concern on his face? No, surely she must be mistaken. The two Sassenach women supported Catherine as they helped her outside and walked away from the camp to a small valley where a stream trickled by. "Let's get you cleaned up," Sarah said, and helped her wash. Catherine was in complete disarray and did not have the will to defy their wishes. "How can you stand being in this place? It's horrible," she wailed. Sarah and Rosemary gave each other a worried glance. "Take some time, have a drink and bathe in the stream. It may help you to calm down," Rosemary said. "I shall return to the kitchen and fetch us some food." Catherine slipped out of her clothes and dipped her skin in the water. It was surprisingly warm and crystal clear. She bowed her head underneath, and when she rose, flecks of water spilled out. Her hair grew heavy and clung together, but she felt refreshed. She let the water come up to her shoulders and enjoyed the feeling of being supported in the stream. Sarah remained sitting on the riverbank, watching over Catherine's clothes. She drew her knees into her chest. "I feel I owe you an apology, Catherine. I did not mean to cause you any harm. I thought I was doing what was best for you, but I see now that I did so without consulting you. I thought that you shared my feelings and wanted to live your life. I am truly sorry that I made an error in judgment." "Thank you, Sarah, but it still does not change the present fact that I am here. I assume that I will not be allowed to leave?" "I don't believe so. There is some tension between those who do not trust us, and if we let you leave, they will only think you are a spy. Perhaps after some time has passed, you'll be able to move more freely, when the memory of the recent battle has passed from people's minds. The guard is one of those who doesn't trust you. He seems to think that you are seeking to take over the clan and twisting the minds of the men you love. If we are twisting their minds, then they are in turn twisting ours," Sarah said, smiling. "But I have quickly learned that that is the way of love. We learn from each other and make each other better. At least, that is the way it is supposed to be. If you get to know Blair and Drew properly, you will find that there is nothing that could sway them from a course of action if they were determined to take it. "Are you truly happy here, Sarah?" "I am. Happier than I would have been anywhere else." "Would you say the same if you did not have Drew? If you were in my position, would you really want to stay here feeling alone?" "I cannot say for certain. Perhaps not. I acted quickly and rashly, but it was a time for heated moments when emotions ran high. I am sorry that my mistake has caused you such suffering and indignity. It is all well for you and Rosemary, for you have found men to share your lives with. But what about me? I now have no hope of living the life I wanted." "The life you wanted or your father wanted?" Sarah asked pointedly. Catherine did not appreciate the question, but she answered it anyway, given all that she and Sarah had been through. "We wanted the same life, but while he wanted to marry me off purely for the status, I wanted to marry to have a family. I liked the idea of raising a child, of making him or her better than I was. I wanted to leave a legacy behind, to be better parents than my own as well. There are so many mistakes I've witnessed that I have longed to correct, but unless things take a much different turn, I am unlikely to see that happen. Life takes strange twists and turns. One never knows what is going to happen next." At that point, Rosemary returned with some food and a rough blanket. Catherine stepped out of the water feeling refreshed and wrapped herself in the blanket before she dried. Sarah got to work at cleaning Catherine's clothes, seeming to fall into old habits of being a handmaiden. Catherine was about to let her do it, figuring that it was the least Sarah could do to make up for the hardship she had inflicted upon Catherine. But then Catherine realised that Sarah had escaped this life. "You do not need to do that," Catherine said. "Please, I want to. I know how much you liked this dress," she said, speaking to the bond they had formed while living together in the same estate. It would have been far easier to hate Sarah if she had lied about her personality as well as her name. But she was so genuine and sincere, Catherine couldn't hate her any more than she could hate a little puppy. "So, Catherine, it is time we should be acquainted, given that we were to be sisters-in-law," Rosemary said. "Indeed," Catherine said tersely, not sure about Rosemary yet. After all, none of this would have happened if Rosemary hadn't run off. "I would like to offer you my condolences on the death of your brother. I know you must have had great affection for him." "I did, for all his faults. I suppose he at least got the death he wanted for himself, though, dying in battle. He always saw himself as a hero. I do wish things had been different, but I would like to try and persuade you that you can have a life out here. I know that it is a world apart from what you have been used to, but that does not mean it is without its charm." "I know you mean well, but I cannot believe that I will ever get used to this place." Rosemary chuckled. "I felt exactly the same when I arrived. I was scared, alone, and although Blair had saved me from certain death, I was not sure that I could trust him. The other Highlanders looked upon me with suspicion, and I received more than one death threat." Catherine's eyes went wide. Having been so focused on her own plight, Catherine had not given any thought to what it must have been like for the first of them to arrive here. "Why did you stay?" Catherine asked. "I had nowhere else to go," Rosemary said simply, and tittered with laughter as she broke some bread and handed some to Catherine. "Really, though, I wanted to be there for Blair, and knew that if I took my chances in the forest, I would likely die. I also knew that if I made it back to England, I would eventually be found and be forced to move forward with my arranged marriage. After the cruelty displayed by... I apologise. I do not mean to speak ill of the dead." "It is quite all right. I am more familiar with my brother's faults than most," Catherine said, intrigued by Rosemary's tale. "It was a troubling time for the clan. Blair's father died, and Blair had always been reluctant to play the role of leader, the role that had been assigned to him since birth. Part of him wanted to be alone, but I helped to show him how important family was. But how did you cope with all the stares, all the mistrust? With great difficulty. Blair promised me that he would protect me, but I did not want to go through life needing his protection. The decisive factor was his mother, Fianna. She is a wise woman. Rosemary smiled. Sarah murmured in agreement as she washed Catherine's dress. Rosemary continued, "She wants what is best for her sons. She helped me see that I did have a place here, and that I could have a life. I know it may not seem like it to you at the moment, but the same is true for you. I appreciate the sentiment, but the only life I want is one back in England," Catherine said testily. "Indeed, but unfortunately we cannot let you leave just yet. Please try to be patient and enjoy life as best you can here. I wish to get to know you, and I feel that the three of us can be good friends. Perhaps in time you will be able to return home. I'm afraid that we don't have that much time. As soon as my father hears of what has happened, he will be coming to rescue me, and when he does, he will not stop until everything here is covered in blood. You will find that the Highlanders will not give up their homes so easily. We shall cross that bridge when we come to it anyhow," Rosemary said. Catherine didn't quite understand how she and Sarah could be so calm when faced with the threat of war. Was it because they did not believe that her father would come to rescue her? If so, then they were foolish. Although the more that Catherine thought about it, the more she doubted her father's resolve. He had never looked fondly on her, not as fondly as he had on Harold, and he was more likely to come to avenge Harold's death than to rescue her. Still, the thought of staying in the Highlands for any amount of time was intolerable. Catherine did not want to wait for her father to come to her aid. She was quite capable, and unlike Rosemary, she did not fear death in the woods. She had faith in her ability to escape and knew that if she made it out of this camp, she would have a free run down to England. All she had to do was face south and keep heading in that direction. How difficult could it be? Although it pained her to be disingenuous, she knew that she had little choice but to play on the good nature of Sarah and Rosemary. If she remained stubborn and petulant, she would always have a guard with her and would never have the opportunity to escape. "I would like to apologise for my temperament. I understand you have been trying to make my stay as painless as possible, and I have not played my part in that. I hear what you have told me, and I suppose it is in my best interests to try and adapt to life as best as I can in the meantime. I imagine this experience will stand me in good stead for the rest of my life, and will prove an entertaining story to tell to my children." "It pleases me so much to hear you say that, and I am glad that we get to spend time together again. You were the only thing that gave me the strength to carry on," Sarah said. Catherine returned the smile and wondered if how she felt at that moment was the same as Sarah had felt all along, knowing that she was deceiving the person closest to her. "Well, with that settled, I think it is a cause for celebration. I shall ask Blair if he can arrange a feast tomorrow. A day of hunting will help the men recover from the war, and then we can all take joy in each other's company," Rosemary said. "I will suggest to Drew that they take Declan as well," Sarah said. Catherine's ears pricked up when she heard the name of her guard mentioned. "I think it is so sad what has happened to his mind. He sees enemies where there are none, and sees himself as the avenger of a rightful cause." "Are you talking about the man who's guarding me?" Catherine asked. "Indeed, he came to us earlier and tried to convince Blair and Drew that they had made a mistake in bringing us here. It was a pitiful sight, really." "He is but a boy, playing a man's game," Rosemary said. "It took great courage, though. I fear that if we do not act, the resentment will fester within him and only cause him to grow more bitter. With him being away from his father, he needs Blair and Drew to act as role models," Sarah said. "He spoke about his father and said that he needed to earn enough glory for the both of them." Apparently, his father was wounded and cannot fight again, and he has instilled this idea of honour into Declan's head, Catherine said. It is a sad thing to see how parents can have such a dramatic effect on their children, even causing unintended side effects. I wish that he trusted us more. I would love to be able to sit down and talk with him about these matters. He often seems troubled, and he cannot truly be happy, Sarah said. It also doesn't help that Deirdre has been whispering in his ear, using her wiles to turn him against Blair, Rosemary said, bitterness on her tongue. Who is Deirdre? Catherine asked. Hearing the women talk was intriguing, but there was much that Catherine did not know. Deirdre is trouble, Sarah warned. She threatened to kill me when I arrived. She is in love with Blair and thinks that I tempted him away from her. In truth, the love was one-sided, only coming from her direction, but she was always trying to sink her claws into a man she could manipulate, Rosemary said. She even tried with Drew, who rebuffed her, but it seems she found a willing recipient in Declan, Sarah added. He is but a boy and does not know Deirdre's true game. I hope he finds a way to learn about what it truly means to be an adult. Otherwise, life is going to be very difficult for him, Rosemary said. Catherine chewed on her food absently and tried to ignore the pang of jealousy she felt when they spoke about Deirdre. She had assumed from his appearance that Declan was innocent, but it appeared that he had more experience than he let on. He had become something of an enigma to her, and hearing the two other women talk about him made Catherine want to know more. He was the same age as her, and yet he seemed to have lived more life than she, although her life had not been completely without incident. It was just a shame that he was so prejudiced against the Sassenach, for if he was so easily manipulated, then she would stand a better chance of escaping. Still, at least he has plenty of life yet to live. I am sure he will be fine. I think of how much Blair has changed in the time I have known him, Rosemary added. The three of them continued talking for a little while longer, until Catherine had dried off and the food had all been eaten. She felt a little better for having her belly filled, and in truth it was almost possible to forget her situation when she was with the other two. But she was determined not to allow herself to enjoy one moment. Despite what Sarah thought, Catherine considered herself a captive, and she was going to remain vigilant. When an opportunity presented itself, she would escape, and nothing would stop her. The three continued talking for a while longer, but then it came time for them to depart. A tension settled over the three Sassenach girls, for it became clear that Catherine would have to be taken back to her room. Rosemary and Sarah glanced at each other, and then Rosemary walked away. Sarah came up to Catherine and clasped her hands. These last few hours have been so enjoyable. It reminds me of old times. I pray that you will reconsider and welcome this new life. I will try to. I suppose you must see me back to my cell, Catherine said, her voice carrying a soft, snarky tone. Sarah's face fell. It is not a cell, Catherine. I have tried to make you as comfortable as possible. I have tried. But Sarah's words faded as she realised that nothing she said would convince Catherine she had her best interests at heart. So it was that Catherine was led back to the room. Declan was standing there once again. Their eyes met, and Catherine was struck by the intensity that lay behind his youthful eyes. Then the door was shut, and Catherine was left staring out of the window once more.
Scan the QR code or click on the link in the description to read the full book. The full audiobook will be available on YouTube in a few days. What did you like the most? Comment below and share this video on your social media and with your friends. Watch one of the following videos. Subscribe to our channel, like this video, and hit the notification bell to not miss any new audiobooks. Thank you for watching.